So I'm going to launch straight into it as I do with everybody and say, Raf, what is your career story?
It's extremely long, so we will probably not spend a few hours because all the people would probably fall asleep and maybe it will replace the headspace up. But my life stories, my career stories, is probably split into two bits. So it's in a corporate world where I spent most of my professional life so far working in the broader people development space. And I've worked in several companies across a few countries, including UK and Poland, where I come from. And then there's a moment which kind of stopped everything, where I suffered from a burnout. And then my career has changed, obviously, afterwards. And it's before and after, because then after burnout, I switched and I work as a coach. I work as a career and leadership coach. So in a way, it's like before and after for me.
Mm. And what, so take me back to the burnout piece, because I think it's something that I've heard a few kind of things from conversations I've been having, particularly around what's going on in the world at the moment as well, of mini burnout episodes where people are just completely frazzled, particularly from Zoom, which we're using right now. But it's something that resonates strongly with me as well, because it was what pushed me out of my corporate career. And it's also timely as well, because it's about this time 2 years ago where I'd left and was staring into the future thinking, what on earth am I going to do? So take us on that journey of burnout and what that feels like. And
oh wow! I mean, when you started asking, it brought all those memories back. But now I don't get so emotional. So for me, it was I got the job that I probably at that time thought it's going to be the best job of my life. I actually left the UK and I moved to Switzerland, where I currently live. So I became a chief learning officer for Deloitte in Switzerland. And I thought, wow, this is me, I've arrived. And very quickly it turned out that the realities are very different than I thought it would be. And then I very quickly realized that A, I can't handle it. B, my body can't handle it. And C, this is not going to end well. And it was a quite dark period of time, because as probably some people who would listen to that experience burnout, like yourself potentially, you have all those emotions that are very overwhelming, because on one hand, you're tired, you're constantly tired. I was constantly tired, stressed, I can't sleep, don't eat properly. And then on emotional level, you feel like you're not on top of those things, you're not at your best. And it's such a disappointing moment, because I was waiting for this moment in my life and I thought, well, this is it, right? And I couldn't do it. And it was very, very depressing, I would say. And one day I just woke up and I couldn't get out of bed. And I just phoned in, I said, come on, I'm sick, I'm not coming in. I went to the doctor and I've never returned to the office. And it was few months of real darkness, because obviously it felt like a huge failure. And I felt like, wow, the life is over, right? My life was over, professional life was over. Then I felt shame, because I thought, well, everyone was looking at me. It was such a public, in my view, obviously, it was such a public failure. And I was ashamed of, of the fact that I didn't succeed, right? So it was few really, really difficult months afterwards. To get physically better, obviously, and probably more importantly, to get mentally in a better state. So that was pretty rough, I would say, a whole year of the whole experience, which at that time thought would kill me, but now I think probably saved me.
and when you were going through that, was there anybody at work that noticed and had tried to have conversations with you about it, or was it something that you came to realize and then everybody all of a sudden was just like, oh, that's what's happening? Like, were there alarm bells ringing elsewhere?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I was quite new in the role and in the company. So obviously not a lot of people knew me. And also I was quite senior. So there's a natural tendency that if you're a senior, you don't really share that much. And even meeting with my peers, you try to at least show that you have everything under control. And that's, if you put it like this, I did not get a lot of support from my line manager at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess answering the question, the red flags were just visible probably to me and my husband, for example. But at work, I don't think they saw that I'm in such a bad place. So I was trying to put the mask on that everything is more or less fine, and these are just obstacles that I will overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Which was quite interesting, because then when I resigned, and then when I first got sick, and then I resigned, and when I returned after some time to basically close all the paperwork and say my final farewell, some people asked me what happened, and when I was very honest, I said, well, I have a burnout. I felt like pariah. It was like you were saying, I don't know, I have an infectious disease that will kill you. So I'm glad that not a lot of people asked, because the reaction was not very supportive. And it was like, woo, all right. So yeah, it was a bit of a disappointing moment. But on the other hand, it's a very sobering moment when you realize that well, not everyone needs to understand your journey and feel the empathy for you.
Yeah, that's very true. I know when I left my corporate career behind, I didn't have anything to go to, and I probably, from what you're talking about, I probably wasn't as burnt out as it sounds like you were. And I was just kind of like, well, I'm just taking some time for me. And even that reaction I got from a lot of people was quite unnerved, and simple little things of, well, what do we put in your leaving email as to where you're going to? Because we always say this person's moving on too. And it became this like shroud of mystery as to why I'd left the building. And what you were saying about that, the shame piece as well, and having a mask there and maybe not wanting to drop or anything, that was part of it for me as well, of just kind of wanting to save some face and being quite a proud person as well, and not wanting to feel like I'd failed. When I look back now and I think, well, I didn't fail.
It's interesting what you said, and tell me what you felt, because I know that I felt to a certain degree guilty that it's my fault somehow, that I didn't do it, that I didn't succeed, that I wasn't successful, whatever you call it, that, you know, that it wasn't the thing and I somehow failed. And I felt the real guilt about this. And that was also a big part of the process to just, well, process that and get rid of it.
Mm. And did that process, you mentioned success a few times then when you were talking about what happened, and did your definition of success that you had prior to burnout and during and afterwards, has that changed and evolved into something else?
It has changed completely, but it has not been an easy process, and hasn't finished, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Because previously, like probably a lot of us, you have the idea of success. It's you get promoted, you earn more money, it's more, it's higher, it's whatever you define. And I was part of the corporate story as well. So for me, it was a natural tendency that, you know, a trajectory of my career would be to go to the top of my function and then be the celebrity and the star development. And it didn't happen. So that was a big car crash for me in terms of the definition of success. So who am I? And then comparing myself with others at this natural, you know, and then you have to redefine. I had to redefine what success really is for me. And now I have a very different priorities and different definition of what success is. But even I think a few days ago, I was talking with my husband about this, and I still think about some of those elements. So I will give you an example. Now I'm really comfortable and I love doing what I do. But sometimes I have this feeling of comparing myself to others. I say, oh, I don't have a corporate career. I'm not head of L&D for X, Y, Z. And then what do people think about what's my job? Oh, he's a coach. What kind of job is this, right? So I do still have those moments when you feel like this is not a typical or standard job that do I have? And then is it success that I do it? Is it success because I have, 100 clients, not 5,000 clients?
Mm-hmm.
Is it success because maybe success will be only if I charge as much as opera? But, but the definition answering your question definitely has changed. But for me, what is always interesting is that I still have those moments when those old habits of comparing myself to others and comparing myself to the benchmark of career and success still happen. I don't know what it is for you.
Yeah, I think it is because I often sound quite flippant when I say this, but like, I don't believe in regrets. Well, I don't mean it flippantly like that, but I kind of like, I feel like the choices that I've made, I've always made them with an intention. And so with that, I've always had some kind of ownership on it. That's kind of like, well, I've only got myself to hold accountable for that. And that's been the change, I think, because when you're working your way up an organization, be it corporate or any other setup, there is a lot of it's kind of, you just pulled along like in a sausage machine of kind of just like this stage and then this is what it's like a recipe for that you're cooking for something, like you finally get to the finished product. And the reality, I think, that be interesting to get your take on it as well at the moment, is that the reality of the world at the moment is that all of these organizations that are supporting all of these huge numbers of employees, the security that was always there for people is being pulled right out from underneath them. And some of the most interesting stories I've heard about people coping with living in lockdown have been more of the tales of people falling apart because they've had their identity of a corporate building or something taken away from them, and they've suddenly been given a lot of time where they have to spend time with themselves and hold that mirror up and go, is this what I wanted? Am I successful? Could I be doing something else? And I've found as well that I've had a lot more conversations with people anyway since I left that world anyway, where you get people that call you brave, or that you're an inspiration, or that I wish I could do what you're doing. And don't get me wrong, I really appreciate that, but I kind of shrug it off a bit as well, because I kind of feel like anybody can do it. It's just there is a level of, I suppose, of confidence that's needed to be able to do it. But it's about, I always look at it and go, it's about taking one step and then doing the next step. As long as you break it down like that, don't try and do everything at once. That was one of my biggest failures, was at the start, I think, was that I just had so many things I wanted to do that I wasn't doing any of them in any kind of depth, and just ended up then with this mishmash of stuff that didn't really have a core message or a purpose or anything like that, which was probably down to the fact that I just got to a point where I was so exhausted that I just thought, if they said I want to be doing it anymore, I'm going to go, rather than doing what most people probably would do, is that they would realize that they were unhappy, and so they'd start looking for a job, and they wouldn't leave the unhappy place until they'd found the replacement of what they thought was going to make them happy, the new job.
But it's interesting what you said, because I mean, I was about to coach you because you unpacked a lot of things.
I'm just like letting talk.
No. But actually, what I see when I work with people, and also it was obvious with me, is that we tend to be in a place when we see, oh, I don't like this place, I hate my job, and then we look for a new job. But the majority of us find the same job. It's just that we change the organization, right? And only when we really hit the wall, like the burnout or something bad happens, that's usually the moment when we realize, and some of us have the courage to actually change it. Because I think what you said, that people say, oh, you're so brave and it's so courageous. And it's true, because most of us, and including myself, will get paralyzed with the idea that we need to face the reality and say, okay, I hate my job, or something's not right. What do I do with this? Because it's scary. And I think it's partly because we are living in a society where the norm, let's say, I'm a bit older, so I remember that the norm is to have a corporate life because that's typical path.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, and also being, for example, self-employed, this is a completely different reality, right? And as we know now, this is very, very difficult when you don't have a, for example, regular paycheck and some level of security that comes with it.
Yeah. I'm also thinking as well, because a lot of the things that you're talking about mirror a lot of themes that come out of struggles or challenges that anybody who identifies as being LGBT plus might encounter. And particularly because this is about this is going to be one of the episodes that's coming out around the Pride season, and we've had Idaho, and there's lots of kind of just bubbling pots of conversations going on around sexuality, and I focus very heavily on 14 to 18-year-olds, and they even see it within our own community very differently. It's very fluid, and they don't really want to be put in the pigeonhole of being I'm a gay man or I'm bisexual. Talk me through the alignment of your career and your identity.
A car crash. Come on, I'm one of those, I don't want to say big old one, but I'm 40 something. So, and I grew up in a very traditional country. It's a country where homophobia is now probably even worse than it was many years ago. So I grew up thinking and learning that being different is the wrong thing, right? So it stayed with me and it's still with me until now. So I had to go through the process of actually growing up and then starting my career hiding who I am. So it was for many years, pretty much until I left Poland when I was nearly 30, that my career really wasn't aligned with who I am, because I was doing some work and some people knew, but I wasn't out, let's say, right? Or it wasn't something that I was open about, let's put it like this. Then I moved to the UK, and obviously reality has changed because UK, it was 2010, it was a very different country. So, but the fact changed in the external world, but in the corporate, in my life, professional life, I have always been thinking that that being gay is an important part of my, obviously, identity, but it's also an important part of my identity that potentially is not so positive. So I didn't see it as an asset. I saw it as a liability, because especially when I work in the financial industry, you have, it's probably a generalization, but at least that was my impression, a white stalemate, as we say, right? So you had those typical white straight gentlemen who were actually running the business, and very often I had feelings that I should hide as much as I can being gay, right? So maybe I wouldn't pretend that I'm super manly and I talk differently and I dress differently. I was still myself, but it took me years to actually evolve and become more comfortable with who I am. And a very powerful moment of my professional career happened when I worked in Barclays. And those two things happened. So I had an amazing team from, I think, day one, or maybe day two. Day one was a bit strange. We kind of, clicked, and suddenly I felt welcomed and embraced.
Mm-hmm.
And probably even more important, my boss was a gay woman. She was also a minority. She was a Japanese American woman. And she was very tough, fiercely intelligent, and she gave me a hard time, don't get me wrong. But then at some point, we connected so much that she became my role model in the way she behaves and she delivers. And when I was leaving Barclays, I actually cried on my call with her because she was based in New York. Because it was a moment when we were with her, and her name is Runa, and maybe she will hear it, and thanks, Runa. We talked about one important thing, that it should never be about who you love, but somehow it is always about who you love. And that's very it's very powerful because it's from simple things like when you're at work and talk about your weekend, right? And then you don't have to play the pronoun game, to the fact how you behave and how you're perceived in the company. And then the fact that you're LGBT is not your liability. I don't talk about this on a daily basis. I don't introduce myself, hey, I'm Coach Ralph and I'm gay. It's not the way I talk about this, but at least I'm comfortable sharing and talking about my family, and that my family is a man. So it took me long years, and it also took people who were on the journey with me who actually encouraged, empowered, and taught me that, you know, being LGBT is not a liability. And that helped me switch to the place where I want to be the one who actually shows the younger guys and girls and LGBT people that, you know, it gets better and we should always be who we are.
Yeah. No, and yeah, and that resonates really strongly with me because I know that for Idaho, I've shared a piece of my story from when I started my career as a secondary school teacher. And if I do have a regret, having said 10 minutes ago, I don't believe in regrets, but my biggest career regret is that I had 2 years where I was in teaching in front of young people, and I could have been that role model for the LGBT kids in the room, and I didn't take that mantle. But I can make excuses as to why I didn't do that. But the for me, I was kind of like, well, it was a fast track teacher training program. I didn't really have much time to myself anyway, and I was still only just adjusting. I hadn't come out to my family at that point either. There's only certain people that knew, and it's really nice hearing you talking about your experience at Barclays there, because in the school that I was placed into, there was a very strong, well-knitted LGBT community, and 3 of the senior leadership identified as being gay men. There were 2 or 3 lesbians, or somebody who was bisexual, and everybody rallied around each other. And there was one teacher who was out to everybody in the school. And there was one experience where he'd been on a training course or something, there'd been a supply teacher in, and the students had faltered on that day and decided to use it as an opportunity to write things in the back of textbooks or on the wall. And that sent a shockwave back through the entire staff body of that's not okay. And it's fortunate because those senior leaders were in the team there and were very visible and very happy to point out that that's not the way to approach things. But it made a lot of us then very nervous about actually, and I look to kind of things in the UK in the last year where we've had parents picketing outside schools and saying that they shouldn't be teaching their kids how to be, we shouldn't be teaching their kids how to be gay. And those were things that were going through my head. It was, I don't want to sit in a parents' evening and then sitting there thinking that I am not a suitable person to be teaching their child because of my sexuality. Like it was something that was wrong with me. So it's good to hear there's that kind of like similarity there between the 2 experiences that we've had.
So thank you for sharing, because I think if we can have a message for whoever listens to that, for me, my experience is that words matter. Obviously actions as well, but for me, it's any of us, whoever we are, LGBTQ or not, the way we interact with other human beings, how we talk and what we talk can have a really massive impact on how other person is really living their life, because whatever we say can really profoundly impact someone that sits next to us in the office or hears us talk about, for example, LGBT people or any other human being. And I think it's worth remembering that also on a positive note, the way we talk and interact can really make someone's life better. And that's what I experience, and that's what I am trying now to actually role model in any way I can.
Yeah. And that was exactly why I think when 12 months ago, I thought, right, I want to do, now I've got the headspace and I know what I'm doing with my business. So I thought I was doing what I was doing, because that changes every day. Kind of like sitting there going, well, how do I want to give back? and I found diversity role models, and that was when I was kind of this is how I can do what I should have done or wanted to do when I was a teacher, because I've got the luxury, I don't know if that's the right word of saying it, but the freedom maybe of being able to walk into a classroom and share my story and then walk out again without taking the bags with me, and carrying them around and thinking, oh, I shouldn't have said that or what. And some of the conversations that, because there's particularly with the older year groups that we go and talk to, that are 17, 18, thinking about their either apprenticeship or university options, some of the discussions that and the intelligence of the questions that they ask is incredible. And that's only been in the 10 years since I left the classroom to today as well. So I think things do move, things get better, and it's a cliche that's thrown around in our community as well, kind of like things get better, and people kind of, oh well, you're going to say that, aren't you? But I truly do believe it does, but there's always, I feel like sometimes there's always a spotlight of kind of where the focus is going to be on a particular part of the community. And it's something that I've talked a lot with Debbie, who's also featuring as part of this series of 5, around another people that I've met at UI that are transgender, kind of the insensitivities of words when you're saying words matter, particularly for that part of our community, is just so damaging, just shows a completely new level of ignorance that you didn't know existed. That you can look at a community and accept it, but then not accept one part of it, baffles me.
And I have a confession. So I have a new client, and I always ask my clients, why did you choose me? And this person told me a few reasons, and then one of the reasons they told me is that because you identify as an LGBT, and they say, well, I'm queer, I don't identify with any genders. And for me, it is still a learning process even, and it's a very valuable process, because I need to ask them, well, what kind of pronoun do you want me to use? How do you want me to address you, right? But it's, and this conversation, and for me, it's about learning as well, obviously, because I'm not really familiar with all those, environment. But I can see because obviously we go through 360 assessments, and I can see that it is a challenge also for the environment where this person works. So to the point which you mentioned, I think it's all about, for me, 2 things. It's about education and educating ourselves and others. And to be honest, sometimes having this, not super easy conversations, but it's asking, how do you want me to call you, right? What's the pronoun you want to use? Oh, I don't understand the concept of this or this. Can you explain to me? And I was very shy. I was like, oh, I'm going to be so stupid. I'm not going to ask. I will go and Google, right? But then I thought, oh, screw this, pardon my French. And then I will just ask. And it's amazing how people react. Oh, let me tell you, let me explain. And you can see that it shows curiosity, right? But at the beginning, I was like, no, I'm going to freak out. I will not ask them.
No. You're completely right. And I kind of, in the conversations I've had with when I first started talking to Debbie, I was kind of like holding back at some points, and we were planning for our Insta Live for Idaho as well. I'd kind of just got to a point where I'd just said, well, rather than us planning questions that I'm going to ask you on this, why don't we just have a conversation? Because, and she was just like, well, you might have noticed I like to chat. So, just makes it so much easier, and it allows people as well. If you think about what I love about people when people share their stories is that it allows others to kind of tap into that in terms of their own lived experiences and how it might mirror or be exactly the same, and take away that I'm by myself kind of feeling. But it also as well allows you to educate people that want to be educated. And it's interesting you said about being curious, because I feel sometimes the education system in the UK in particular knocks curiosity out of young people at quite an early stage in their education. They're not encouraged to be curious about an answer to big questions. They're expected to be ready to sit a test and know all the answers to a particular test. I don't know how it's affected the education set up over in Switzerland, but for us here, we've got now like a lost generation that's developed of young people that forever are going to have on their CV predicted grades rather than the actual grades that they got for sitting an exam because of a global pandemic. And they're going to walk around, maybe I'm making a dangerous presumption, but if I were them, I'd be walking around with my CV in my hand for the rest of my life thinking, oh, I don't really want to broach that bit. It's like when you've got an awkward gap on your own CV and you don't really want to explain, which kind of like goes into the burnout piece as well, of like, somebody says, oh, you've got a year there where you didn't do anything. What happened? It's leveling the playing field in a way. It's the curiosity piece is, for me, it's a great opportunity for young people because I just sit there and I think, you're going to have to actually do some work and think about what you want to do now because you've got no other choice.
I think what you mentioned is the perfect example that we live in a culture of achievement, right? The exam achievement, and that's the focus. And I don't say it's right or wrong, but as you said, it does not. How does it set up younger generation? I remember how I was set up. I was so focused. I was the best student or whatever. And what? I'm damaged goods now, right? No, but I mean, I was so focused on achieving that I was probably one of those anxious overachievers because I was not allowing myself to fail. And when I failed, I felt it's going to be a disaster. And all those things build up. And then I guess that kids now probably have even more difficult with all the pressure on social media. I don't have kids, I'm not an expert, don't get me wrong. But what I can see is that I would probably struggle more now, having all those things available through social media, plus the pressure of basically delivering and being super achieving and
Yeah.
Where's the time for living and experiencing failing?
But massive opportunity to be able to look at failure and see it as an opportunity in a way and learn from. It's not necessarily a mistake because it's not something that it's been put upon them rather than them failing an exam. But it's interesting in that respect.
But even for me, and tell me what you think, when COVID started and then lockdown started in various countries, what became quite obvious to me is that a lot of people and their messaging on, for example, LinkedIn was about, this is the time to grow, this is the time to learn new things, and all these things like that. And I thought, what the hell is this, honestly? I mean, and I got the message that if I don't learn Spanish in 3 weeks of a lockdown, I'm going to be a massive failure, or if I don't set up a new business. And I thought, I don't know anyone who is actually treating this as an opportunity to grow because we are in a bloody survival mode now. But I was shocked. There are so many people pushing the whole concept of this is the time to grow and shine. And I thought, oh my God, am I the weird one here? Or this is a bit strange to me.
No, I'm with you on that. The number of conversations I had right at the start of lockdown, and I still have, to be fair, a couple of times a week, is around that toxic positivity of this is the opportunity. Now you can do that side hustle that you've always wanted to do. Like, use every minute to be maximizing your time and live like an entrepreneur. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, technically I am an entrepreneur. I don't usually use that term very much, but I wouldn't wish that onto somebody, particularly when everything else is swirling on around you. And it goes back to that. It's kind of trying, maybe because of what we've been talking about as well, if you've got that corporate piece pulled away from you and working from home, it's almost like a security blanket of just like, well, this is how you make sure that you don't wobble, you don't fall out of that building, you're still working towards the top. It'll keep you focused. You need to be, and it's almost like people are trying to, I look at it and go, it's like people are trying to be really positive, because before this happened there were a lot of messages starting to bubble around mental health that have now exploded everywhere, that there are a series of distractions to stop you from actually worrying about what's going on, and creating a timetable so that you never have time to sit and think. And if there's one thing I love about working for myself and the journey that I've gone on in the last couple of years, is that I have time to sit and think and reflect. But then I've always been quite a reflective person anyway.
But it can be that can be scary for a lot of people if they have the moment to reflect, because we are so used to not reflect because it's scary. Like, oh Christ, what am I doing with my life, right?
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
A question I want to ask you, because it's kind of on the tip of my tongue, because as I'm hearing you talk about stuff and then knowing what coaching involves, going through everything that you've gone through, some people might argue, tell me if I'm wrong, that choosing to pursue something where you're going to hear similar things all the time is just going to bring that back up and stop you from moving on. So what I'm trying to say, kind of what got you, because you said you were working as a chief learning officer before you burnt out. So was it that it was something that was similar to that role and you wanted to continue on that journey, but or just in a different format? Or is it something about coaching that you love? Is it the skills that you've picked up on the way that make you particularly good at coaching?
So I think combination of a few factors. So I worked in a people development space for those many years. So my role was always about developing people.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the highlights of my burnout was that I realized something that I knew before, that my corporate role doesn't make any impact. It's all about presentations, data. It's corporate BS. I didn't feel I make any difference to anyone's life, right? Yes, I'm responsible for people development, yet I see zero impact. So, and I knew I'm passionate about this, and it sounds like a cliche, right? I'm passionate about data. I'm passionate about coaching. And then when I took a few months off, and I was in a deep dark hole, so to say, then when I emerged, it was very obvious to me that I want to continue working with people and helping them grow, but in a place where I can really make impact.
Mm.
And coaching was for me a natural direction. I used to be a line manager, so kind of coaching sometimes is an element of your role, not always, unfortunately. But it became obvious to me that that's the path forward. And to your question, I had a very powerful moment few months only after the whole thing, when I interviewed actually for a coach role. And when I was asked about why did you leave, why do you want to do this, I actually for the first time told them my story of my burnout. And then I wrote a piece for Thrive Global also about burnout. And I stood by it that only when you process the whole thing, because it is always part of your story, but the way you shape your story depends on you. And then only when you're ready to go out and tell your story, that's the moment when you can start, let's say, healing. It sounds very opera style, but you can really start the place where those conversations that I have with my clients do not put me back in a place where I feel emotional about this. I think that going through this journey helps me because, yes, you have to be a good listener as a coach, and you have to be really focused on the people you work with. But the quality of the questions and the ability to ask the right questions given the circumstances is the key to successful or basically useful coaching. So I think having gone through this whole mayhem of my burnout, it really makes me probably a person who's got more empathy, more compassion. And I do believe, and I hope that's the case, my questions are better, more focused and precise. And I do see it in the data and also feedback from my clients that that's one of the reasons why they enjoy working with me. That I know sometimes where they are, but because I've been there, so that's why I can ask them questions that help them probably navigate through some of those challenges.
Mm. And is that then essentially, if there's people listening and they're thinking, no, but I've kind of thought about having a coach before, but I'm not sure whether it's right for me. Is there Is there a kind of like a not a cookie cutter type approach, but is there the ideal kind of person for coaching? Is that a good question or not? I don't know, but
It's a good question, and I mean, I will not give you a full answer because it will be too controversial, and we will get a lot of hate online. No, but actually, I joke sometimes with a few of my colleagues saying, "Well, everyone is a coach now," because probably it's a big business, and there are a lot of coaches, and uh, and people have different market niches, different specializations. I think the key to be a good coach, but it's just my view, is first of all to be able to listen and hear someone. And and yes, the background helps, I believe, because it makes you a better listener and makes you a better questioner, so to say. And I think the more experience you have, simply the better you are as a coach. So I would say controversially, not everyone can be a coach. And I think not everyone can be trained to be a coach. It might be very controversial, but I think even some of those things I mentioned, the level of empathy and compassion, I think this is really needed. And unless you have it, then people would not feel seen and heard when you are in the session. So that's just my view, and people might disagree with me. But I always ask people who ask me this question, I always say, what kind of person you would go to as a coach? What would you like them to have as qualities and skills, right? And they usually give me the answers that point to this direction. I want the coach to understand me, to ask the right questions. And very often they say, I want the coach who has life or work experience, because I know that it's not pure theory, because they understand the context where I live and operate.
I don't think it's controversial at all. I think there's probably not just coaching as well, like going back to that piece around entrepreneurs and messages and toxic positivity and stuff like that. There's just a lot of, I've done this, well, you can do it too, that goes around a lot that doesn't help people. I think it's interesting listening to you kind of articulating what makes a good coach, because I think from my experience of having coaches, I think I've had 3 so far in my career, they've always been really, really good listeners. And there are a lot of people that, maybe this is controversial as well, that would see themselves as being great leaders, therefore think they'd be an amazing coach, who have very poor listening skills.
I agree. And I would ask you a question you don't have to answer. Anyone who is going to listen, ask yourself a question. Remember last time you had a conversation with someone, how actively you really listened, right? If someone talks to us, what do we think? Do we really focus on what the other person is saying? Or are we thinking about the next question? Are we thinking about what happened yesterday? Are we daydreaming? Are we thinking about something completely? So the whole, as you said, the whole concept of really, really listening, it's not easy at the beginning. Trust me, when I started as a coach, my thoughts and my head was all over the place. So I do agree with you. Some people are great leaders, but they still, I would say, listening skills is something that we should continuously work on and improve, because it's something that we can easily lose. Because sometimes you have a bad day, something happened, and you have to still, for example, listen to their person and focus on what they're saying. And it's not easy because you want to be somewhere else, something happened, you're sad, you have a stomach ache, lots of things can be a problem at that point.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And there's a really interesting report that I was reading a couple of weeks ago from Mercer. It's called Winning with Empathy, and looking at the impact of the fallout of everything that's happening and employee experience. And then there's other research I've read around Gen Z, around the fact that the overwhelming majority of them have noticed the companies that coped with this and the ones that didn't. And the ones that they've gone, yeah, that'd be a good company to go and work for, are the ones that listened to everything that was going on with their employees, made sure that they were comfortable and happy, made to feel as secure as they could feel before they started looking at their balance sheets and thinking about whether or not they wanted to cut their salary or if they were going to have to make people redundant and things. Because a lot of corporates, I feel there is this kind of old thing of this, like, you're just a cog in a big machine. That's never kind of going to go away, I don't think, but there's something about being a well-oiled cog, and one that feels like it's actually delivering something rather than just being a monkey there shelling nuts, as my father would say. Yeah.
But that's very true, and I think we already have, and we'll have more stories of those companies, how they behave in the current time, and it will be a good probably business case to see how companies behave and how they really look after their employees. And naturally, as we know, this is, if it's a charity organization, not for profit, companies need to make profit to stay afloat and obviously pay salaries. But also in the interim, how they behave towards their employees, meaning where the focus is it really on people? And yes, we know we earn money because you deliver work for us, or is it just treating them as resources, very easily disposable? It's an interesting observation, and sometimes it's very political, and we will not probably talk about this, but if you see the difference how this is approached in the US or in Europe versus retaining jobs and roles and versus dismissing people, obviously that's very, very different, and obviously we will have very different experiences depending where we are and where we work.
Yeah, it's very true. So I'm going to ask you the question that I do ask every guest each week. What would be your, to wrap up, what would be your best piece of career advice that you would give somebody that was listening?
Oh my God, you killed me with this one. Wow, what's the best piece? I should avoid something cliche like be yourself or follow your passion and money will come. About toxic positivity. I would say the best advice I would have for people is that you have only one life. There won't be a second chance.
Yeah, okay. Short and sweet and very impactful. I like that. It's a strong.
And it's very scary because usually it involves thinking about dying and death. But if you narrow it to thinking, I have only one chance to live it, as me, whatever your religion is or whatever you believe, then it hopefully helps us to be more bold in some of those choices and decisions we make.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, Ralph. It's been really interesting chatting.
Thank you for having me. If you want to talk about kids, and we can always become an expert in parenting and homeschooling, and we can have an Instagram with lots of positive quotes like, entertain your kids and they will grow up to be millionaires.